you very much. Okay, just to get down to brass tacks and to maybe have the conversation, first of all, as you mentioned, US is a country of immigrants. And I've just mentioned that, besides UK, US is the second, of course, biggest contributor of remittances of diaspora, remittance flow to the country. What is your thoughts on the Kenyan diaspora in the United States?
Well, as I said, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be invited. So thank you. As I said, the diaspora, I think, is incredibly important to the United States and incredibly important to Kenya. As I said earlier, we are a nation of immigrants, and the Kenyan immigrants have made all kinds of contributions to the United States. As I said, in 4 or 5 big diasporas in the United States, Minneapolis, Atlanta, the Bay Area, etc. And so, and obviously remittances is an important part, but I also the expertise that you can bring back to Kenya to help Kenya on its journey of economic growth and development for all Kenyans may be the most important thing that the diaspora can bring.
So the knowledge transfer as well. So just kindly also make me understand, because we have good initiatives from the US when you talk about AGOA, and some of these initiatives that are also the free trade that was there championed by the former President Donald Trump. My question to you will be, what other opportunities that do we have as diasporas there in the US?
Yeah. So I am very bullish on Kenya. I'm very bullish on the opportunities in front of this country. And let me talk about one that I think will be of interest to this group that's very near and dear to my heart, which is Silicon Savannah. And today in America, there's Silicon Valley in San Jose. There's also Silicon Alley in New York. There's Silicon Beach in Miami. And I think the next real economic hub can be right here in Nairobi in Kenya. You are already the tech leader in East Africa. I think Kenya can be the tech leader in all of Africa. But yes, you can applaud on that. But there's 4, in my view, many people have tried to replicate Silicon Valley. I think there's 4 really important things. The first is internet connectivity. One of the priorities of this government and one of the priorities of the diaspora has to be 100% internet connectivity to every household, to every person in Kenya. That's number 1. Number 2 is you already have one of the most important ingredients, which is a small number of very large companies who can bring on board, train the next generation of tech executives. So Safaricom, M-Pesa, now Google, Microsoft, Oracle, you are starting to attract enough big companies who then can train the next generation and seed them to startups. In America, and almost every person in Silicon Valley can trace their roots back to Hewlett-Packard. That's where they maybe got their start. So you have that here. The next thing is, of course, the importance of venture capital and financing. You have the beginnings of a terrific venture capital operation here. So I don't know if you know this. The venture capital disbursements in Kenya is the second largest on the continent, only behind Nigeria. As a percentage of GDP, you win.
Yeah.
And it's growing faster than on any other continent. And then finally is those entrepreneurs who have the disruptive ideas to start here in Kenya. And where do many of those entrepreneurs come from? They come from some of the great universities. And the key to Silicon Valley was actually Stanford University. Without Stanford, Silicon Valley would not be Silicon Valley. So I have a challenge to all Kenyans. I say this every time I speak. Which university in Kenya is going to be the Stanford of Kenya? Because you need to really develop many, many more tech entrepreneurs. You need many more tech people. And today, the biggest universities here actually turn out only 100 to 120 computer scientists. Ultimately, you will need 500, 600, 1,000 computer scientists every year from these big universities. So that's the challenge. For those of you who went to Kenyan universities, go back to your alma mater and say, make it happen. So I think another big opportunity is apparel. Thank you. You mentioned AGOA. AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunities Act, has been fantastic for Kenya and many other countries in Africa. Very, very important. Just starting in 2020, 2 big apparel manufacturers came here because they were looking to diversify. everyone is looking to diversify out of Asia. The obvious place to come is Africa, and specifically Kenya. So just in the last 2 years, there's been 25,000 new jobs created in Nairobi in apparel, and they're good jobs. 75% are women, and virtually all are under 30. And they serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner, have a medical clinic, and a child care center. So super important. I think pharma. You all know this. Actually, Kenya is the largest developer on the continent of animal vaccines. You should be the largest developer of human vaccines. Wow. And then agriculture. Agriculture is so important to Kenya. And if you think about it, agriculture needs a couple things now. It needs water and money. And water storage, irrigation. There's so much opportunity around building dams, water storage for the rain that you get, and then how do you use that to irrigate in a more efficient and modern way? So those are just some of the big opportunities. Obviously, financial services, tourism, logistics, but those would be sort of the top 5.
Indeed. And of course, I will be remiss if we don't really mention about PPPs, the public-private partnerships as well. When you mention the animal vaccine and the human vaccine, we cannot fail to recognize that you've been also very helpful with the Kenya Medical Research Institute here, yes, trying to develop even the malaria vaccine as well. So could you just briefly talk about it before we gravitate maybe to the challenges ahead as well? We cannot take the rough without the smooth as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, as you think about what's happened in vaccines, and many of you may be scientists or medical doctors, the advent of mRNA vaccines, which is the COVID vaccines, is basically a platform that allows development of vaccines much faster than in the past. You know, when I grew up, polio vaccine took 5 years to develop. When COVID hit, everyone thought this is going to take 5 years to develop a COVID vaccination. One of the modern miracles is it took less than a year. And that's because there's this platform called mRNA vaccine manufacturing. And so those companies think they can do malarial vaccines, polio vaccines, HIV vaccines in a much more rapid R&D environment. And they are all looking for distribution in Asia, manufacturing and distribution in Asia, manufacturing and distribution in Africa, and of course in the United States and Latin America. And as I said, I think this is a big, big opportunity for Kenya. And I think you'll see over the next 6 or 8 months some very interesting announcements in that regard.
A good place to actually, give some good, heart-warming claps here. Yeah. So, they always say, especially, and I think this is from one of your guys in America there, that you cannot see the picture if you're in the frame, right? So you are out of the frame, and you can clearly see the picture here of our economy in the country so far. What would you say, from your own assessment, is the biggest challenge with our economy, or something that we're struggling with as far as the economy is concerned?
So I would say in terms of foreign direct investment in Kenya, and that's going to be not the only source of growth. There's going to be lots of homegrown Kenyan companies, lots of Kenyan companies that are growing bigger. But I think it is important for foreign trade and direct investment. And I will tell you, as the CEO of 2 Fortune 10 companies, Africa is not on the top of these CEOs' lists. When I was the CEO of HP, it was not on the top of my list. We got challenges in America, challenge in Europe. What are we going to do about China? All these different challenges. And this is where the diaspora can come in. What we need to do is tell the story of Africa and the story Kenya. Why Africa, and why kicking the growth of this economy here? We've got to get on the agenda of big company and small company CEOs in America, in Europe, in Asia. And here's some of the facts that we need to talk about all the time. I'm sure you all know this, but did you know that by 2050, 1 in 4 people on Earth will live on the African continent? 1 in 3 working age people in 2050 will live on the African continent. So if you're an investor, you're a company, if you don't have an Africa strategy now, you're going to be behind in 2050. And so this is the story that we need to tell. All of you can be ambassadors for Kenya in your group, in your social circles, in your cities. And we are going to collectively, I think, need each and every one of you to have that story of why Africa Kenya, where, the elevator pitch, if why Kenya, we all need to be able to tell that story. Lots of other challenges, but that's the biggest.
Briefly, because I want us also to talk about the upcoming African Leaders Summit, but let's talk about the diaspora in the United States, because we know also from, some of the studies that we have gone through that from four migrants in America who are Kenyans, one of them is a nurse. We're talking about, of course, the youthful budget demographic dividend that we have in Africa so far. What sort of initiatives then will there be from the United States in terms of trying to stimulate the nurses who are there, because also here in the country we have lots of nurses. Some of them also they lack jobs as well. No, briefly, just briefly.
Exchange program, the opportunity to travel outside of Kenya, whether it be Europe or the United States. We love it when Americans travel outside, young Americans travel outside the United States, because you end up being a citizen of the world. Your aperture of what's possible is broadened and opened. And so for many, many years, the American government, USAID in particular, has had lots of exchange programs. Those programs where young, smart Nebraska go spend, a year in California. And so I would encourage you to talk to your relatives who may still be in Kenya about how to, really apply for some of those programs. The other thing, and I'll do a little commercial for the U.S. Embassy. When I first got here, there was a visa problem. Maybe you've heard about that problem. I heard about it. Every hour, every day. And it was a review for a visa till June of 2024. Today, if you go on the website, you can get an interview in the next 3 months. So we want people to go from Kenya to America. And we also made a decision that if you have had a visa to the United States in the last 5 years, you do not need to have another interview. So you can submit your documentation. I've had many stories of people who submitted their documentation. Six days later, it was back in hand with a new visa. So I think that's an important thing to talk about.
Thank you. I like the phrase, the aperture, right? With the African Leaders Summit, could you just broaden our aperture so that we can see a clear perspective of what we expect this year?
So next week in Washington, D.C. is a very important event. It's called the African Leaders Summit. There are 49 heads of state of African countries coming to Washington, D.C. They're all coming with their entourages as well, as you might imagine. And there will be 3 days of meetings on issues that are very important to the United States and Africa, whether that's foreign direct investment and trade, regional peace and security, how we cooperate on defense, and all these other things. I think it's a real sign of how important Africa is to the United States today. I don't know if you know, but Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has been to Africa 2 or 3 times since he came. We've had the USTR, the United States Trade Representative, led the United States delegation to the president's inauguration. It's always useful to watch the signaling value of who leads these presidential delegations. The fact that it was the USTR, Catherine Tai, was very important. So I think this just underscores that understanding of how important Africa is today, how important it will be in 2050. And it was an opportunity to get all the African leaders, many different parts of the United States government, businesses. There's a whole couple of days of business forums that are, I think, going to be very useful to the American companies as well as the Kenyan leaders and the African leaders.
Thank you. Even as we are winding up, what will be your headline for us today? Especially now we're going to the festivities. It would be nice to also for you sing for us Merry Christmas song. I'm joking. But honestly, just your closing remarks. What would you say?
Well, as I said, I'm very bullish on Kenya. I'm privileged to be the United States ambassador here. Most of you know I'm not a career foreign service officer. I'm a businesswoman. And so the amount of the tight relationship that Kenya and the United States has had for well over 60 years is incredibly impressive. As Cabinet Secretary Matua said, there's a lot of trust between our countries. There's a lot of history. And I think the best is yet to come in terms of economic development, food security, and building those bridges between Kenyans and Americans.
Yes, so they say it takes 2 to tango. Thank you very much. We want to appreciate the salutary effort that is coming from the United States.